Hi, everyone. Number one Marmaduke fan here. Batman Saves the Day, based very loosely on the Dark Knight film by Christopher Nolan, is kind of a cheesy, campy children's book, but it's a lot of fun and better illustrated than a lot of quote unquote professionally illustrated comic books published by mainstream superhero comic book companies this past year. And also a really good example of what heroism looks like when you're trying to sell the idea of heroism to young children. I notice they don't have children's books about woke special social justice warrior characters punching straight white males in the face. Something about that doesn't really work in a children's book about a heroic character. So, as somewhat goofy as some of this art is, I still would enjoy this kind of a story better in mainstream superhero comic books. So let's see. We've got adapted by Jennifer France, pencils by Cameron Stewart, digital paints by Dave McCaig. What I'll note is it's a little awkward to have this hyper-realistic sort of tactical soldier suit that Batman had in the Dark Knight movie in the context of a children's book. I wish they would have gotten to streamline the suit a little bit and make it have a little bit more cartoony fun. But it is really, really interesting to see the Dark Knight version of the Batman, who was a very realistic, very kind of tactical soldier, take on the Batman character, portrayed in sort of a cartoony, childlike universe for a children's book. And I'm actually really happy with the Batman comics I've read from DC recently. I think it's mostly Marvel, where I've seen some really toxic political stuff and poor art in some of their books, but there's a little of that creep into DC books too. So let's have a look at some of the strengths of this children's book. So Rachel Dawes looked around her Gotham City apartment. It was decorated with flowers and streamers. Perfect, she said, as she placed one last vase of rose on the table. Everything was ready for the big party. Rachel couldn't wait to surprise her friend Bruce Wayne for his birthday. What I really love about this is that this is kind of a scene from the movie where there was a party for Bruce, but they've contextualized this for a kid. So it's like a little apartment. They've got flowers and balloons there for him. He shows up, and she gives him a cake. He's a little bit like, is it Christian Bale? Yeah, he's a little bit like Christian Bale, but they've given Christian Bale a little bit more of a square jaw. So I guess he has that sort of brownish hairline that Bale has. But what's funny about this is the Dark Knight Batman, but in making it for kids, they've simplified a lot of the things to make Batman look more heroic and Mark Hamill's very creepy Joker to be more of a cartoon villain. So the text reinforces like really simple ideas about heroes. And I'm kind of interested in this because do kids sort of come up with this on their own naturally, or do they pick this up from the stories that they're read to? Because when I'll talk to kids about their superheroes, they'll say the superhero saves the day. The villains will sometimes do surprisingly violent things in little kid stories, like they'll have dinosaurs show up and eat a bunch of people, and you'll think, oh, that's so shocking. But I think that's kids taking really simple ideas about good and evil and just making up this really inventive, really spur of the moment story where the details come fast and quick. And that's sort of a different way of thinking about story than grown-ups do. And there is something very authentically childlike about this book where the Joker shows up, he causes some trouble, and then Batman sneaks out so he can save the day. And that's just great. Look, Rachel's in trouble, so we establish in the first pages that Rachel is a kind and compassionate person who just wants to give Bruce a nice birthday. And let her go, a voice boomed. The Joker and his men turned to see Batman. Well, isn't this a surprise? The Joker said. Batman wanted to catch the Joker, but first he had to save Rachel. So, in the context of a children's story, a heroic individual cares about preserving life first. That booty. Oh, I'm so bad. And then stopping the villains comes second after stopping the situation and saving innocent lives. So Batman's awesome. He knocks some clowns into each other and catches Rachel. And when he turns to find the Joker is gone. And Rachel and the other party guests slowly began to wake up. They saw their hero, Batman. He had saved the day again. And then it ends with him kind of flying off into the distance and the people at the party knowing that Batman will be there to save them. So what's kind of amusing about this book, maybe what's unintentionally hilarious about it, is how very dark and gritty the Dark Knight universe is. I mean, I'd watched R-rated movies by the time I got to watch The Dark Knight, and some of the themes of anarchy and violence that they had in that movie were surprising. Joker was a serial killer. Joker would pit his crooks against each other, but they managed to convey these really raw ideas about insane, malevolent evil in a context where it had a PG-13 rating. It introduced me to this concept of a really evil, destructive individual, a destructive mindset, a violent mindset that was sadistic, but it did so without throwing. There were scary moments and some graphic moments, but it was mostly subtext. Like you would see Joker's insane sort of terrorist video and the person screaming for help, and then you'd hear the person getting killed, and that was terrifying character. But they didn't have to show you a lot of blood and guts to make that point. So even when they adapt this into a children's book and it's a little bit silly, those ideas about good and evil from the mature story still translate and work in the context of a simple story. So people tend to have this false dichotomy that it's either, overly simplistic good and evil on the one side, or mature and subtle, ideas about the gray morality on the other side. There are some aspects of gray morality to The Dark Knight. Batman spies on people to try to locate the Joker. He is a violent vigilante, so that adds some moral questions to the character of Batman. Should he be out dispensing justice all by himself and taking the law into his own hands? But because the morality of the Dark Knight trilogy is so good, it works in the context of that movie, and you can even make it work in the context of a little kid's book. I love this little kid's book. I wish that this sort of pure morality was more present in the contemporary comics market. And despite the goofiness of seeing that hyper detailed suit in a kid's book, this was charmingly illustrated and just a fascinating little bit of Batman the Dark Knight ephemera, I guess. Or if you're a fan of this movie, why not? I bet your kids would dig this. This would be a fun little introduction to Batman. Anyway, number one Marmaduke fan. I love you guys. Why don't you like, comment, and subscribe? And I will have more children's book and comic book reviews coming at you. And who knows, maybe even the odd superhero children's book. Woo!